Moira, make sure you don't fall over. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now standing on Tower Green, which is the village green of the Tower of London. Now, some village greens, they have a duck pond. Some are big enough to have a cricket pitch. However, we have our very own private execution site. Now, this glass sculpture behind me stands in memory of the private executions, and it's not to be confused with the public gallows that were up on Tower Hill. 6 people were beheaded here, 3 of them Queens of England. But before I tell you about them, let me tell you about the buildings that are surrounding us on Tower Green. Down this path to my right, you will come to the Bloody Tower, where you'll see displays of Sir Walter Raleigh and the 2 boy princes we talked about earlier. Moving to the right, that impressive L-shaped building in the corner, that is the Queen's House. Perfectly preserved Tudor building. All the others were destroyed by the Great London Fire 1666. That's now the home of Lord and Lady Dannatt, our 159th Constable. It's had some very important prisoners in there. Queen Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of King Henry VIII. She was held there prior to her execution. Also William Penn, imprisoned for his offensive writings. And even as a prisoner, he managed to compile the controversial pamphlet, No Cross, No Crown. He was released on condition he left the country, and crossing the Atlantic, he founded Pennsylvania, a convict. Anyway, also in prison in there was deputy leader of Nazi Germany, Rudolf Hess. He was held in there for 3 nights in May of 1941 before being moved to the country for his own safety. The houses either side of the Queen's House with the light blue doors, they serve as more accommodation for us. They're all Beefeater houses. Behind me there, that is the Beauchamp Tower. That's the main state prison during the Tudor period. And if you can, make sure you go in there and you'll see graffiti that is 500 years old. Moving to the right, the 4-storey building there is the residence of our Tower Doctor. Now, if we get poorly at night, we can't dial 999 and get an ambulance, we have to go and see him. And if he can't help us, we go next door, because that's the home of the Tower Chaplain. And this is where he works 1 day a week in the chapel hall of St Peter ad Vincula. We're going to be entering shortly to conclude the tour. Behind you there, that is the Waterloo block. It stands on the site of the old ground storehouse that was destroyed by fire in 1841. That was erected in 1845 as a barracks for as many as 1,000 soldiers. And that's now the home of the Crown Jewels and Royal Regalia. And ladies and gentlemen, we wouldn't go to all this trouble with 2 thick walls, a moat, 37 Beefeaters and 12 armed guards if they were not the real Crown Jewels. Trust me, she doesn't keep them in her top drawer in Buckingham Palace. They're in there and you will see them when you join that long snake in Disney queue when you finish here with me, okay? Right, the sad bit I'm afraid, the executions. First person to be executed behind me was the 2nd wife of King Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn. Now, she was tried and found guilty on charges of incest, adultery and even witchcraft. Now, she was beheaded, not with the axe, which she feared so greatly, but by her own request in the French manner with a 2-handed sword. Lord God, have pity on my miserable soul, with the final words of our most infamous queen. 5 years later, it was the turn of Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury and the last of the Plantagenet family. Now, this lady had committed no crime, she had no trial, so why was she executed? Because she was the mother of Cardinal Reginald Pole, and it was he that the king would dearly love to get his hands on. But the Cardinal was safe in Rome, preaching against the king after his break from the Catholic Church. And as the king couldn't get the son, he took the mother instead. This brave 67-year-old lady refused to put her head on the block, and the inexperienced executioner literally hacked her to pieces where she stood. The following year, in 1542, the axe was to fall twice on the same day. This time the victims were Queen Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, and her lady-in-waiting. Now, Catherine was executed for her associations with other men, both before and during her marriage, but it was to be her affair with Thomas Culpeper that was proved to be her final undoing. According to popular folklore, her final words were, "I die a queen, but I'd rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Jane Boleyn, the Viscountess of Rochford, her lady-in-waiting, she was executed immediately afterwards. Her crime was she knew of the adultery, but neglected to tell the king. Now, it's to be 12 years before the axe fell again, and this time the victim was the uncrowned Queen of England, Lady Jane Grey. Now, on the death of her cousin, Edward VI, she was declared queen by ambitious relatives, and she was to rule for just 9 days from that White Tower, before the rightful heir, Queen Mary Tudor, regained that throne by force. Now, 16-year-old Jane was imprisoned in the Gentleman Jailor's House, number 5, Tower Green, that left-hand blue door. And from an upstairs window, she would have seen her young 18-year-old husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, being taken from this Beauchamp Tower and marched up to Tower Hill for his public execution. A short while later, she would have seen his headless corpse returning for burial in this chapel. Now, if this were not anguish enough for this young 16-year-old girl, she would also have seen the carpenters prepare the scaffold for her very own execution later that same day. Another sad part of English history. Now, those and many more poor unfortunate souls have found their final resting place in this beautiful chapel, where we're now going to be entering to conclude the tour. Before we do though, I need to mention a few points. This is still a Christian place of worship, and I therefore ask you to respect it accordingly. Gentlemen, if your religion permits, please remove all headdress before going inside. There's to be no eating, drinking or smoking, and due to Crown copyright, there's to be no photography, audio or video equipment of any kind. And finally, if you have one of those instruments of death, the mobile telephone or cell phone, you make sure that phone is now on silent. If your phone rings in our Royal Chapel, you will die of embarrassment when I throw you out the double doors. Talking of those double doors, there's a very small step as we go in. Trust me, that step will still be there when we come out. Okay? Right, we've got a big group here, so when we go into the chapel, go right to the front, fill all the chairs. Don't leave any gaps between you. Fill all the chairs up, please, and I'll be waiting for you inside.